Welcome back to the Horse Racing Show, episode 35. I'm Kenny Rice. Glad that you're with us. Of course, most of you, especially if you're listening to this podcast, you're familiar with the report in the New York Times last week about Justify testing positive for scopolamine, and we talked a little bit about it, some having a little fun with it at the start of this show. But when all this was taking place, I knew there was only one person, and I mean this sincerely, to have on this show, Dr. Mary Scollay, who is now the Executive Director and COO of the Racing Medication and Testing Consortium. I've known her for a long time and have great respect for throughout the U.S. People have respect for Mary and the work that she has done around the racetrack as a former equine medical director of the Kentucky Horse Racing Commission, among her many accolades. And Mary, thank you so much, Dr. Scollay, for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me.
You know, I don't want to make too much light of the situation, but, you know, when I get into like 300 nanograms, and that's like tons fewer nanograms than what you'd find in a grain of salt and all with the situation with Justify, has it been much ado about nothing, doctor, or is this something that was a little more serious and should have been taken more seriously?
Well, I mean, let's start off by saying I don't know the facts of the case. Okay,
Gotcha.
So I know what I've read in the New York Times and what I've, seen opinions on blogs and websites and things like that. But I was not part of the investigation, and so I don't know the substance of, what they found and what they determined. I mean, I have a few, I guess, thoughts. Starting with your question about 300 nanograms, I got pretty studied up on scopolamine pretty quickly last week, and I found one article that referenced you could get a peak urine concentration of 100 nanograms from a horse having consumed 6.5 grams of Jimson weed. Mm-hmm. And just to give that some perspective, 6.5 grams, that's about the weight of 6.5 paper clips. Now, how that translates to a volume of plant material in hay, I don't know, mm-hmm. but it struck me that, that's probably not a tremendous amount. So is 300 nanograms in urine an achievable concentration from having consumed the plant material? I'd have to think so.
Yeah. And
with some drugs, there is a correlation between the concentration in the urine and what you'd expect to see in the blood. But excuse me, I don't know that that's the case with this substance. So I don't know that we can draw any conclusions about the concentration in the urine and what might have been in the blood and how it could have affected the horse.
As far as that now, he was clean, Justify was, in his pre and post-race test all the way through the Derby, the Preakness, and the Belmont. So you had been around last year with the Horse Racing Commission as the medical director when he had the pre and post Derby test that he came out clean. Justify did.
Well, so let's be clear. Scopolamine was not a part of our scope of out-of-competition testing.
Okay.
Because it is not a substance that has a potential to impact a horse's performance for an extended period of time after the substance is no longer detectable in a horse's sample. So, yes, we test every horse that is tested in a post-race setting for scopolamine, and there was no evidence for it in his post-race sample in Kentucky, and I understand there was no evidence for it in any of his other Triple Crown post-race tests as well. But to be fair, it was not something that we looked for in an out-of-competition test in advance of the race.
Right, and so scopolamine basically is not going to make you run faster, jump higher. It's not a performance enhancer from experiences, not just Justify, but across the board. It's not seen as a performance enhancer. Is that right, Dr. Scollay?
I mean, that's my perspective on it. I know there was a remark made about it having bronchodilation capabilities and easing the workload that the lungs have to do. So there is that potential. But if you look at all of the side effects associated with its use in humans, I think the potential to impede performance far outweighs the potential to enhance performance. I mean, there's dizziness, lightheadedness, drowsiness, blurred vision, light sensitivity. The list is really quite long of the side effects associated with this drug. And to the extent that they would occur in a horse, and we don't know because you can't ask the horse, are you dizzy? Right. I'm holding up two fingers. Do they look blurry? There are a lot of things that can't be known, but if we extrapolate from the effects in humans, I can't see how that would enhance a horse's performance.
Yeah, I can't imagine, no matter what the horse is, if you're running in a $10,000 claimer, I can't see where, as you mentioned, all the side effects. And I read up on some. I've actually had friends that took scopolamine that were having surgeries to help
Right.
ease them so they wouldn't be as dizzy if they'd gone through a long time under anesthesia. They wouldn't be as, I guess, motion sickness and things like that. And I think another buddy took it that was going on a cruise for about 8-9 days out on the high seas. He took it. But it doesn't seem to me, if you're even like a 10,000 claim, you would probably judge. I'm just talking about as a fan. You'd be able to see the horse just didn't quite look right coming back, in my opinion, if you had all those side effects.
Well, I mean, again, I don't know to what extent the horse would get those side effects, and I don't know how they'd manifest in terms of the horse's appearance and demeanor. But yeah, I would have serious questions if somebody, elected to use it as a performance enhancing substance. I think that's, decision wise, I think that's a bit of a crapshoot, to be honest. I think it could backfire.
We're talking with Dr. Mary. Yeah, I mean, that, to me, that's what it did too. And we're talking with Dr. Mary Scollay, Executive Director of the Racing Medication and Testing Consortium, just taking over that post just a few weeks ago after being with the Equine Medical Director of the Kentucky Horse Racing Commission, well-respected vet for many years. And Mary, I think the biggest question in my mind that it raises with this, just from what I've heard from you and what I've read and talked to a few other vets and trying to figure out, this is not like you hear like in baseball where the guy suddenly starts hitting 50 home runs. It was hitting 14 last year. Scopolamine is not something that's been mentioned many times in the past as a performance enhancer. And then this story comes out, and people that don't like horse racing immediately start saying the horses wasn't legit. And the whole thing is not even to comment on Justify anymore, but the fact that there's no uniformity in horse racing and no one's able to say, is this like taking a Tylenol instead of taking an aspirin? Is this like going 36 instead of and a 35? Is it drastic or something that maybe shouldn't be such a considered banned or such a performance enhancing substance? I think that's maybe the biggest thing that could come out of this, is try to get some uniformity, which I believe you guys are trying to do over there.
We work at that every day. And just to give you some perspective, in human sport, the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency considers scopolamine a permitted medication. Mm-hmm. So they, and they're pretty keyed in on performance enhancing drugs. And it is not a prohibited substance for them. It is on their permitted medication list. Now, you'd still have to have a prescription and a legitimate justification for using it. You can't just decide to use it. But they apparently, human sport does not view it as something that would enhance performance. And
I would guess that, as you mentioned, that drug testing, having covered some Olympics, from equine to boxing and a few other things, that when the anti-doping people say, we don't have a concern about it, because we know some medication, like an inhaler and things have been in the past turned out to be a banned thing. If they're allowing it, I can't get too excited that this is a performance enhancer then.
Certainly that conclusion has been reached in human sport. And to be fair, our prohibited substance list for out-of-competition testing is largely adopted from the World Anti-Doping Agency prohibited substance list, with some modifications with respect to horse racing. So, we are fairly closely aligned with respect to performance-enhancing substances. Realize that there is a fairly big difference in how we regulate therapeutic substances, because we have the stewardship of the horse and the humane considerations, in addition to performance enhancing questions that need to be asked. So whereas in human sport, they don't regulate corticosteroids and local anesthetics and muscle relaxants and those sorts of things, we do in the racehorse, because we don't want to send a compromised horse out there to get injured, cause others on the track at the same time to sustain injuries. There is a welfare and safety component in addition to our concern about performance enhancing substances. So our spectrum of regulation is a fair bit broader than what human sport does.
And scopolamine, I want to get this clear again. This is something that wasn't tested for before the Derby, but on any horse, right? Because it's not been considered, or the perception is it's not a performance enhancer.
That's correct. but it is a component of all of our post-race tests.
Okay. Now, you think this is going to bring racing together at all, Dr. Scollay, that someone's going to say, okay, look, this, again, you don't have to test for it before a race because most people don't think it's a performance enhancer. It is included in a post-race test, which I guess was the whole thing out in Santa Anita. Maybe we should look at our laws a little bit, our regulations a little bit, and try to get together so we don't have a story that comes out that mostly I think everybody outside of horse racing just got confused. I don't think they were informed as much as confused, and that creates, of course, divisions and knee-jerk reactions.
Well, so, I mean, to me, this situation is not nearly so much about scopolamine as the process applied when the laboratory issues a report of finding. And I think there's been some misunderstanding about the process. And I think the other thing is that the process is different from state to state. And to your comment about uniformity, yes, it would be helpful if we all approached the investigation process the same, the deliberation on the implications of the finding the same way. And that is not the case right now. I mean, it seems to me that the outrage, to the extent that it's going on, is really related to people saying this happened without our knowledge. How is it possible that the laboratory could issue a finding and have it go away without us knowing about it, without us understanding the process that reached that decision? And so, to me, that it's really not about the substance nearly as much as people having expectations of being included in the investigative process. I'm not entirely sure that's the best approach.
Yeah, I mean, and isn't this, from what I understand, what the Racing Medication and Testing Consortium, where you're now the executive director, Dr. Scollay, isn't that kind of one of the goals, is to try to have some uniform rules and try to have some better communication with all the states so the old one hand does know what the other hand's doing?
Well, so the RMTC, makes recommendations with respect to regulating controlled therapeutic medications or addressing doping threats, performance-enhancing substances. We don't have a regulatory authority. We make recommendations to the Association of Racing Commissioners International, the ARCI, and they shepherd the model rules process, and they're the ones that really at the moment are carrying the ball on trying to get uniformity across North America.
Which is not easy, as we know.
No,
being around.
No, it is not. It's quite challenging.
And I guess one of the biggest challenges to me I've always seen is every state, and actually they have pride, like in Kentucky or California or New York or Florida or any of the other major racing states, Arkansas, Louisiana. Don't want to leave anybody out. We're heard all over the country. But, I guess I would hope someday in there, and maybe be better for the vets, I got to believe that most of the trainers would be aboard to have some kind of in-house measure to take care of things, put together a committee of so many of the guys running the states come together and have 4 or 5 members, sort of the Supreme Court, if you will, of horse racing, as opposed to taking it to Congress, which I know they want to do. They bring it up about every time something like this happens.
Well,
I threw a lot out there at you, I know, Mary.
Yep. There are no easy answers here because, not just sort of parochial politics, but there are local differences that may need to be considered in how you regulate racing. A state that has lots of horses shipping in across state lines, crossing borders, you need to develop continuity and harmonization within that entire population. Having a rule in one state when the neighboring states have different rules is counterproductive and can potentially harm a horse. If you've got a rule that is more permissive with respect to a certain medication than the states around you, you run the risk of attracting those horses that require that medication. So your racing population and the integrity of your product may potentially be compromised because of a more permissive approach with respect to a medication or a class of medications. But let's look at California for a minute. almost all of the horses that race in California are housed at locations under the jurisdiction of the CHRB.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in central Kentucky, many of our horses are housed at private training facilities or out of state. And so our ability to regulate the population is really geographically based. Kentucky and other states face challenges that aren't necessarily faced by California and the way their population is housed. So we have to write rules that address the local needs as well as the global need. And I guess that's where things get kind of complicated. Everybody agrees on a premise, this is a philosophy that we want to adopt with respect to regulating medication, but how do we implement it locally based on our population that we have to regulate? And so, at the 60,000 foot level, uniformity is great. At the implementation level, it can be a bit more challenging.
Yeah. And summed up very well, as I knew Dr. Mary Scollay would be able to do. Really. That's because, well, no, I mean, everybody, I've had friends, in the other sports I cover since this came out, the New York Times story, and they've asked me, they said, how much are these horses? They always juiced up. How many? I said, by and large, I know trainers will get fined, reprimanded. Sometimes there'll be a trace amount of something. It doesn't mean people are trying to cheat always. And I'm not here saying I love horse racing. Let's go horse racing. I mean, it's been great for my career, and naturally I want it to be successful. And I don't think I'm naive in saying I really don't know that many instances where there's just out and out cheating going on. I just have never heard of any kind of a conspiracy out there, and there's always that suspect and things they'll talk about, but nothing's proven. I mean, I don't think I'm too naive on that.
I mean, horse racing is a cross-section of the general population. And to the extent that, anybody in a business or any other aspect of society, a certain percentage of the population is going to take an edge, is inclined to, wherever possible, take that shortcut. And so I'm not saying it doesn't happen in horse racing, but
Sure.
Is it pervasive? Absolutely not. I mean, I consider it an honor and a privilege to have spent almost my entire career as a veterinarian working in horse racing. And, some of the best people, the best horsemen, the best advocates for their animals. Like I said, it's been an honor to be a part of it. So no, it's not rife with cheating and performance enhancing drugs and hops and all that sort of stuff. It really, I'm still a fan.
Well, I mean,
I'm still a fan.
Me too. And like I tell people that are sort of familiar or not very familiar with the sport, listen, there's a lot of money at stake here. Trainers are not going to ruin their whole career over a horse or two. And everybody wants these horses to be healthy. You want to go out there and win the race. You're hoping maybe to go on to a breeding career. And so it's in everyone's best interest for the horses to be as healthy as they can be. And that's really a simple, but I don't think, again, a naive statement.
No, I don't think it's naive at all. And certainly in the climate in which we are currently existing, we all need to be on our absolute best behavior every day in terms of how we care for them, how we elect to medicate them, how we choose to train them and exercise them, when we choose to enter them in a race, how that surface is managed, all of it. I mean, everybody right now needs to be standing up as straight as they can and doing the best they can, because the scrutiny is not going to lessen. And quite frankly, we should be doing this the right way anyway.
How do you like the new job as executive director of the Racing Medication and Testing Consortium?
Well, it's new challenges. I miss my office at the horse park. I used to have a great view, and I am now downtown. But on the other hand, the eating options are much better, so it's fine.
You got a new business card.
I do. As it turns out, I'm running a business, which is probably the steepest part of the learning curve. The medication and the drug testing, and I really got to build my skill set there at the Racing Commission. So that feels comfortable to me. But the running of a business, that's a new challenge.
Yeah, because basically and help me out on this. The RMTC, I know it's about trying to have more like a laboratory standards and testing standards on a world-class level. They already do it, and they're trying to do that more. And again, as we talked about, trying to develop uniform rules and bring racing together as much as they can. Is that the simplification of it all, Mary?
Sure. I mean, you can write uniform rules, but then where the tires meet the pavement, you have to enforce them the same way. And so that means consistency between laboratories with respect to drug testing practices. That means consistency between regulatory bodies in terms of how they respond to findings from the laboratory. It is a broad process that has to be made consistent. And just the writing of a rule that everybody says, yep, that's the rule, that's the first step. That's not the end point. The end point is everything that supports the fair and even-handed enforcement of that rule.
And you still get to go out to the track sometimes, don't you?
Yeah, I'll run into you the first Saturday in May next spring.
No,
I'll find you.
No, we won't go that long. That's one of my. That's one of my favorite things. Is we have a meeting on Thursdays at NBC with all the veterinarians and the people involved, the stewards and things, and everybody always asks Mary the questions. I'll just say this: they do. I say, we got to say, what would we do here, Mary? You get all the questions. I mean, most of them. And it's probably because you announced that you listen to Led Zeppelin, which, to me is what it's about.
Well, and Saturday, here's a plug, Bourbon and Beyond, Robert Plant in Louisville, and I will be there front and center. Yep.
Did I say we had the best guest? We always have consistently had the best guest. Dr. Mary Scollay has explained, I think, as well as you'll ever hear about this whole thing with scopolamine and the testing, and she's going to see Robert Plant in Louisville. There.
Yep, it's all good.
I tell you, it's all good. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me. Hope to talk to you again soon.
And we'll see you before the Derby, and enjoy Robert Plant this week. That'd be a great show.
Oh, I am pumped. It will be a great show.
Do you have a favorite Zeppelin song, Zeppelin album?
You know what?
That's a tough one, I think. That's almost like who's your favorite horse to me, I think.
Well, I mean, I think Kashmir was their greatest song ever.
Yeah.
So, but Stairway to Heaven, that was the theme for my prom. So there are memories there as well.
I think that was like a universal prom theme, wasn't it?
Yeah, yes. But great memories nonetheless.
Always. We would play an excerpt of that, but then we'd have to pay royalties, and we don't have that much kind of budget. But it's good in our head. We're hearing it, okay?
All right.
All right. Dr. Scollay, thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye. Dr. Mary Scollay with great insight into all this situation. Coming up next, we talk with trainer Graham Moshe, only here on the Horse Racing Show.